up with your parent or maybe a grandparent baking bread for you? Let's see the hands. All right, now keep your hands up. How many of you like to bake bread for yourself? Okay, put your hands down. Perhaps you have had the experience of making the dough or watching someone do it and letting it rise up and over the top of the bowl and kneading it ever so carefully and watching it bake. Or maybe your experience has been using a bread machine. Good inventions also. When we experience that moment, we are filled with all kinds of memories about times of sharing bread. Or maybe we simply just enjoy that particular moment in time when we breathe in that aroma of that fresh baked bread. You know, there are all kinds of bread. Many kinds of flavors. I won't try to name them all for you, but you might try to think about that. There's sweet kinds and salty kinds. And think about all the shapes. There's loaves that are long and some that are round, some that are flat. There's unleavened and leavened bread. And then there's those specialty shapes like buns for hamburgers and hot dogs, or hoagies or dinner rolls, or maybe even breadsticks. And today, as we remember our Native American brothers and sisters, we think about their fry bread. It's amazing, isn't it, if you stop and think about all the different ways that we eat bread. Sometimes many different ways in the same day. What about toast in the morning and then sandwiches? Or muffins, or biscuits, or rolls, or bagels. And then there's always donuts. Or there might be pastries of other shapes. What about pizza? Or side dishes to many kinds of meals. I grew up in my family that at every dinner time there would be a plate on the table with plain sliced bread. Usually in those days it was white, plain sliced bread. When we stop and think about all of this, it becomes obvious to us that bread is a staple part of our lives. It is very familiar. When we think about how well-known bread is to us, it makes it easy to understand why Jesus used bread to help us connect with him. In our story today, it is not long after the resurrection, and the disciples are deeply missing Jesus. They are still trying to figure out what happened and what exactly they believe. They are on both a physical journey of walking and a journey of faith. And so here we have two disciples who are walking down the road to Emmaus. It's a village about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And as anyone would, they were full of conversation while they were talking and walking. They were remembering all the events that had just happened in their lives. And as they were walking along, the risen Christ joins them. But they do not know who he is. And so the two disciples respond to this stranger about all these events that they are pondering. They describe Jesus and his mission as a prophet, mighty in deed and word, before God and all the people. And as they talked and walked, it began to get dark, and Jesus begins to go on his way. And so they look to him and they convince him to come and stay with them and share a meal with them. And so there they are, with their meal, complete with the plate with the pieces of bread on the table. And when Jesus joins them at that table, he took that bread that is already on hand and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. And in that blessing, and in that breaking and sharing of the bread, new life is offered. And their eyes are opened in a new way. The sacred memory of their hearts is rekindled within them. The feelings of hope begin to bubble up inside them. And Jesus is revealed. Jesus becomes the host at this meal, which becomes an expression of thanksgiving and deepened faith. Their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And then he was gone. Those weary travelers now feel alive. Their hearts are renewed. Their hearts are burning within them. They say to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road? While he was opening the scriptures to us?" It's kind of like they were saying, "Now we get it. We can feel it." Their burning hearts illumine their eyes that were blind, and it quickens their soul, and their journey of faith has really just begun. The risen Christ, present within the community, enables them to gradually understand the full meaning of Jesus' life and ministry, his death and resurrection, and it encourages their faith. When the disciples see the risen Christ, there is familiarity and there is mystery. They begin to get it, and yet they still have wonder. Isn't that how it works with us? As we journey in our faith, we experience the familiar and also that which is a mystery to us. Sometimes we use what is familiar to remember. Like the disciples at the meal with Jesus, sometimes our connection with something familiar makes something click within us. Often when we are not even expecting it, but we have a feeling level experience. I had that experience when I went back to Phoenix a few weeks ago and went to worship at the church where I began life, literally, and where I was baptized as an infant. And I walked into that church, into the grounds and into the fellowship hall and into the sanctuary, and I was just flooded with memories. And then when I saw the children's choir put on their white robes and their crosses, I knew that that was my experience of worship. And some of the other feelings I felt, I couldn't even put my finger on exactly. But inside my spirit, I knew that I had met Jesus there through worship and Sunday school and all the leaders and teachers and people who lived their faith with me. And in those moments, my heart was burning inside of me. It was that connection with the familiar that reconnected me in new ways with my faith. And so it is for all of us. Just as we remember the life events as something familiar to us, just as familiar as the aroma of baking bread, so we have that same invitation in our faith today. The promise of this story is that Jesus will meet his beloved in the breaking of the bread. Or another way to say that is, in all of the ordinary moments of our lives. Today we're invited to a common meal with the familiar bread. Sharing that common meal removes the boundaries and allows communion with Christ, who who meets us whenever we gather at the Lord's table. The love and grace of Jesus invites us to this table, each of us and all of us. As we celebrate what is known to us, as we celebrate the familiar, we also know that usually our faith journey does not keep us in the familiar all the time. We move from the familiar to a new insight, new revelation. Sometimes that's the mystery part of our faith. We may not always understand in our minds, but we know in our hearts that we are filled with the presence and the love of Christ. And that experience comes to us in as many and varied ways as there are people in this room. We are constantly growing in our faith, seeing and experiencing it in new ways. Listen to this quote from John Leith that sums it up for us. Revelation is the clue that enables one to put together all the disparate experiences of life into a meaningful, coherent whole, to see a pattern and purpose in human history, to overcome the incongruities between what life is and what life ought to be. So eat this bread today, and may it remind all of us of the never-ending love and grace of God in Jesus Christ. And may it also empower us to move and grow in our faith so that our hearts are burning with that love and grace to share with others. Thanks be to God. Amen.